cluster, geographically speaking?
Well, that's contact tracing. You can find that because you contact trace them back to the place of employment. They'll have a common place of employment, which, by the way, happens very frequently.
But are we talking about like just a couple of blocks or large swaths of area? Because if you're talking about like micro targeting and you're talking about 3 or 4 blocks, I mean, no one lives in a bubble. They can just walk a few blocks and go to an open store there.
Yeah, that's why we have the red zone, the orange zone, and the yellow zone precisely for that reason. Because you walk a couple of blocks this way to go to a restaurant, you walk a couple of blocks this way to go shopping. So we have the most intense restrictions, somewhat less.
So what if, in terms of like testing and getting that like ramped up, have you thought about working with some of these synagogues in Borough Park and doing testing at those sites? Because
yes.
I see that, for the city's testing, there's long lines. You don't see Orthodox Jews in those lines, that they're, maybe working with the community to get them tested specifically would be helpful.
We do that. We work with civic organizations, religious organizations. We've been working with churches. We've been working with synagogues. We'll go into a church and do testing. If they want us, we'll go into a synagogue. Did you have a point, Melissa?
Just to punctuate what the governor was saying, when we're looking at these things and we're able to look at them at the block level in the red zone, and then you've got the orange zone and the yellow zones going out, and so you're able to track whether or not actually at the heart of the cluster, if the cluster is starting to spread. And that's what's really important here. When we're looking at the numbers as of this morning, it looks like it's being successfully contained. So that's a way to know with this new strategy with the micro clusters, is it going into the broader community? Is it not? And that was the importance of doing the rings and then looking at the positivity, not on zip code levels, but on these actual rings around to see if the margins are starting to be infiltrated by the virus or if we're being successful in containment.
So how about
changes to the restrictions? Sorry, Dave. And when could we see changes to these restrictions? When do you think, if the numbers are going down?
Goes with the numbers. It's all about the numbers. Just follow the numbers.
So as you look at an area block by block, how small do you envision a red zone being? How small could it go?
Your block is going to be a problem. No, just your block. But it's targeted for different reasons. You can go, our data goes finer, frankly, than a geographic zone would work. In other words, you could do a block. But a block is meaningless, right? Because you walk blocks this way, blocks this way, blocks this. So we can target it down to whatever geographic area makes sense. Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking, what do you envision as being the smallest red zone that you'll have in the city? Is it 5 blocks by 5 blocks? It's not a zip code anymore. It's a block or a couple of blocks. How small does it get?
That's a good question. It gets as small as you want to make it, that is operationally efficient, assuming you have that dense a cluster. That would have to be a very, practically, how do you wind up with a very high concentration in that small an area? It's normally somewhat more dispersed because they're going to the same restaurants or the same church or something else.
Governor, at the Kew Gardens cluster, you said the numbers were going down. I remember back in May and June, there were specific metrics and thresholds that were laid out to go on to the next stage. Do we have those thresholds in this microcluster strategy too?
We are developing them, but these are so refined that it's more just you can make a decision by looking at that specific cluster, right? You're right. When we had the phases for regions, we had metrics up so people knew when they were getting close, and it was very transparent. And I thought it was engaging of people, right? You can find out how you're doing relative to everyone else. With this strategy, we don't have those same benchmarks because it's so particular and circumstantial to that cluster. But you do know the numbers are either going up or going down, and you do know the state is at 1%, 2%, 3%. You really don't want to get higher than that.
So
Did you have a point, Doctor?
Just say, it also depends on population density. If you have an area where you have some incredibly dense buildings versus a street where the houses are scattered about, and you have a lot of cases in that, suddenly that's a much more relevant area.
Anybody else have a point? I'm sorry.
Okay.
Hold on one second. Did I violate any laws here? Privacy rights? Okay. I hate when they tell me afterwards. You just violated some rule.
So once a red zone is designated, has there been an increase in testing? Have you guys seen that?
There's an increase in testing, increase in enforcement.
And people are they going on their own volition, do you think, or is it like an outreach thing?
Well, it's always an outreach thing, right? There's no mandatory testing. You don't drag people in. It's increased testing, but it's more the enforcement, because it's almost by definition. If there's a cluster, it means there wasn't compliance for whatever reason. People don't believe in it. People don't believe in masks, whatever the reason. The only answer to a lack of compliance is enforcement. I understand you don't want to do it. I don't want to do it either. But those are the rules to keep other people safe. So you have to have, and that's why I've been harping on enforcement, because you don't have a cluster unless you have a lack of compliance, which means you've heard it all, but you're not complying. You know, it's not a public education effort, right? There's no person in New York who needs to hear you have to wear a mask. I will give you $10 for every person you find who says, I never heard that. You mean the state wants you to wear a mask? I never heard the governor say you have to wear a mask. I never heard it. Never heard it. It's not public education. I don't have to say wear a mask. It's people aren't doing it. We know the congregate numbers for gatherings in a bar and a restaurant. It's lack of compliance, and the only way to address that societally is enforcement. Oh, that's so harsh. I know it sounds harsh. It does sound harsh. But that's what I said before. I think it's love. It'd be much easier for me to say, everything's great. Go ahead, go party. I'm with you, go party.
No, and just back to your question on the testing, we are increasing the testing in those red zones, as the governor said, but also in the orange and the yellow zones. One of the requirements, if you're in one of the rings around and the schools are still open, is that you have to test 20% of the in-school population. And so that's an additional step that we're taking so that we can find out through randomized testing in those zones around, is it starting to seep into the broader community? And as we've gone through this over the last 7 months, everything we've been doing has enabled us to be more nimble and more sophisticated. We now have the contact tracing app. As of yesterday, 570,000 New Yorkers have downloaded it. That's a tool that we're using. The increased targeted testing, the identifying of the red zones, orange zones, yellow zones, all of this is making it so we don't have to take draconian, broad-based measures where some areas of the country in Europe and throughout Asia have had to do, where you just say everything is closed because it's out of control and we don't know where it is. What the governor's saying is we now know where it is. We can track it. We know how broad it's getting. We're taking additional measures in the buffer zones around to ensure it's not spreading even further, with the hope that when people understand this, getting more testing, further refine knowing what it is, make sure the numbers go back down, reopen smartly.
Can I get one statistic to add to that? So about a month ago, if you took just the red zones, just the population within there, we're doing about 1,900 tests a day. Right now, that daily average is about 4,000 tests a day, 4,300 yesterday. This is about 30% above what the statewide testing rate normally is. We test about 0.6% of the state population every day. This is about 30% above that. So this goes to the governor's point about oversampling, about really focusing resources. So testing has gone from 1,900 a month ago to now more than 4,000 every single day, just within the red zones.
Let's take one more.
Governor, about enforcement with an example. So on Monday, there's supposed to be a wedding in Williamsburg that might attract a lot of people from Rockland County. My understanding is that the sheriff in Rockland County has sent out some kind of a warning. What would you say about that? That's enforcement that may be an issue coming up in 2 days.
And enforcement in that matter is, which is what actually happened in this case. We received the suggestion that that was happening, did an investigation, found that it was likelihood that it was true. There was a large wedding planned that would violate the gathering rules. And Dr. Zucker signed an order saying you can't have a wedding that in these locations that is over the gathering line, gathering guidance. Beth, you want to speak to that because you know the facts better than I do?
Yes, so yesterday, Dr. Zucker did sign a Section 16 order. That order prohibits the mass gathering that was planned for a particular location in Williamsburg. It was outside of the target red or orange or yellow cluster zone, but the information that our investigation revealed was that upwards of 10,000 individuals were planned to attend. And so the order was actually served in conjunction with the New York City Sheriff's Department. That order was served last night.
And that order is
To prevent.
to shut it down.
Correct.
Do you know if that in fact?
The order was personally served last night. We have not had any feedback. An individual who served with a Section 16 order is then permitted to request a hearing to Dr. Zucker, so we expect we will hear about a hearing.
But the city is aware of it. We did it with the city. They're aware of it. I'm sure that they're going to have people monitoring it. Look, you can get married. You just can't have 1,000 people at your wedding. You get the same result at the end of the day. You just marry. It's also cheaper. Go ahead.
You said last week you can fool some people, but you can't fool the state of New York. And then the mayor the next day said there's some confusion about combination yeshiva child care centers. Is someone getting fooled here?
No, there are. No. There's a clear delineation. You can be a child care center, and then you're licensed as a child care center, or you can be a school, and you can be operating as a private school and under that license. But they are separate licenses. A licensed child care facility can operate within the guidelines, not a school. And you know what you are because you have a license. You're either licensed to drive by the state of New York, or you're licensed to drive by the state of Massachusetts or some other state. You know when you look at your license. You're either a child care center or you're a school. Or you can have a joint license, but they both have clear rules, right?
Correct. So for anyone that doesn't have the OCFS license, they are not permitted to operate.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. Have a good day.